We're rolling.
Okay.
Sitting a little bit far away, but I'm close to you anyways.
Okay, good enough.
Today is September 27th, 2018. We're in Monterey, California with Herb. What's your last name?
Stern.
Herb Stern. I interviewed a Sternberg yesterday from Machal,
We're here.
San Francisco.
Oh,
Arnold Sternberg from Boston. He was in the 51st Givati Brigade. And
What
the 3
do-
battles of Latrun.
so he was in Israel?
Machal,
Yeah,
Yeah.
but ground, air,
Givati, the Givati Brigade,
yeah,
infantry.
yeah, infantry,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and yeah. Herb, tell me where you were born and when.
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, in August of
I can hear that now.
1927.
1927.
Yeah.
So when you came to Palestine, you were 20, 21?
No, I was not in Palestine.
You were here.
I did all the
All your
work,
stuff here.
all the work here.
Okay.
Yeah, I had just gotten out of the service, and I was in Seattle. Was my final military service. Prior to that time, during high school and before, I was a ham radio operator and involved with electronics and whatever. And in Seattle, I was with the Alaskan Communication Service, which was under the teletype network well before email, up through Anchorage, Alaska, and then down through the Aleutians.
Before, we're going to get to that in a second.
Yeah.
I want to go back. I want to know who Herb is. I
Okay.
want to know what kind of house Herb grows up in. I want to know where Herb gets his, passion for Zionism. Tell me about your parents.
Well, my parents were nondescript Jews, second generation.
So they were born in the States, both of them?
Yes, in Chicago.
Chicago.
I was raised with my grandmother until I was about 7 years old. I had come down with the diphtheria when I was 4, and they found that my mother was the carrier. So they had to send her to a camp in upstate Michigan for diphtheria
Can you
carriers.
explain to me what diphtheria is?
Yet at that time, it was a dreaded disease. It was a very, very bad disease, running high temperature and loss of weight. And a lot of people had memory problems after it. And there was always a carrier involved. Somebody.
Like homophilia or something like that?
Yeah.
Genetic.
Yeah, it was not. Yeah, she probably got it from somebody else, or she may have been born with the gene, even, who knows. But once I came down with it, and a couple of other students in my grammar school came down with it, then they said, we got to find the carrier, So at any rate, my mother turned out to be the carrier. I was raised with my grandmother, who lived in a single apartment with her youngest son,
Your uncle?
my uncle, who was never married because he had committed to support my grandmother. So they had like a 1-bedroom apartment.
What about your father?
My father took my brother and kept him, retained him, but he couldn't take care of both of us. So he.
So this happens when you're 4. Your whole family comes apart.
Yeah. My aunt took care of him during the day because she lived in the same building, and then he would take care of my brother during the evening and through the night and whatever. And I lived with my grandmother for almost 3 years, I guess. She never spoke English. She only spoke Yiddish. She kept a kosher house. Her youngest son, the one who supported their house, was working, because these were Depression days, that he supported her well because he was postmaster of the local post office in Chicago.
What neighbor are you? North side, south side? What are you?
We were south side, Marquette Park, right near Midway Airport.
I always get mixed up. There's north side and south side. This is just for the record. I'm just the south side. That's the White Sox, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the other is the Cub. Yeah.
And the north side's the Cubs,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Just trying to get my
Yeah,
orientation.
yeah.
So
Well,
you're in the south side.
Yeah, we're in the south side.
Now, after your 3 years with your grandmother, does your family get back together? Or
They did, and my father was able to gain better employment because it was tough times.
Yeah.
And he, 1933-34 was the Chicago World's Fair, and one of his older brothers who had money rented him a booth at the World's Fair, and you probably remember it. You pay the operator a penny, and another penny goes in a machine that they crank, and it makes an elongated.
Yeah.
So we had 2 or 3 dies, you know, one for the fair and one for whatever. I still have samples of them upstairs. I collected them. But at any rate, I remember every night, because my mother was home by that time, every night he'd come home with 2 big sacks full of pennies. We'd have dinner, clean off the table, roll the pennies out on the table, and then my brother and I and the 2 of them would roll them up into paper rolls, 50-cent rolls. Then he would take them to the bank on the way back to the World's Fair, exchange it for currency so he could pay his rent for the booth the next day. So that was...
the World's Fair, that's like a few months. Isn't that like a few
No,
months?
that lasted over a year.
Over a
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, and then he took that machinery on his own, and he went down to the Texas Centennial, which was the following year, without us, without the family. And then when he came back, he had an offer for a very good job in Lincoln, Nebraska, and we moved there. I was bar mitzvahed there.
Yeah.
So
A lot of Jews in Lincoln, Nebraska.
at that time, yeah, because it was a college town. It was a college town, and we moved there in '39, I believe, and I was bar mitzvahed there, and then I recall sitting with friends in their living room having dinner on the day when the president announced we were going to war, that Japan had.
41.
Yeah. And and then right after that, a couple of my father's brothers had already moved to California, and one of them said, "Sam, I think I can get you a job," because he was.
Father Sam?
Yeah, he was like a tool and die maker. He said, "I think I can get you a job at the Kaiser shipyards here, and I can get you a letter that says, if you come here, you got a job," which allowed him then to go and get ration stamps for enough gas tickets to get enough gas to drive the car from Lincoln to LA. And then we lived there for on and on. And so that was more or less our permanent home.
In your parents' house, what's the status when it comes to Judaism?
None. Almost none. My mother and father both demanded that my brother and I be bar mitzvahed. And, but they had little or no
There was no
background.
Talking about Zionism.
No,
and
no,
the
no,
land of Israel.
no,
And
no. They were, my father became very concerned about the newscasts that we started to see coming out of Europe. And that he used to worry a lot about that. He never did much about it, but he worried
it
about
was on
it.
his mind.
Yeah, right.
What could he do?
Yeah, well, he got together with other members of the community, and my mother was very active in
This is in LA already.
in LA. Yeah. We moved to LA.
Because by the time you're in LA, the war's going on, and there's already rumors coming out of Europe about.
Oh yeah.
They don't know about the size of.
That's right. They
Holocaust,
just know the
but they just know
problem.
that it's bad.
Yeah, that it's a
But
problem.
nobody knows about the gas chambers yet. Nobody knows.
Yeah,
Correct.
that's correct. Yeah. It wasn't until
After the war, during the war.
yeah,
44 maybe.
late, maybe 45 almost, before the first things start sneaking out, and that was from some of the Jews that hid, and then they passed it on to an American or a Canadian paratrooper who lost their plane, and they would tell the paratrooper about it, and the news would get back to London, and then it would grow from there because they heard it there, then they heard it in Norway, then they heard it in Spain and whatever else. And so the news kind of filtered through. And it was a concern. And then at that time, my brother and I were teenagers.
Brother older or younger?
Younger, 2 years younger. And at any rate, my mother became very busy at that time, committed herself to the local Hadassah group in our area, where they were knitting mainly scarves and caps and whatever, that because they had heard that there were Jews that are already filtering out of that area, and hopefully as far as Israel and or Palestine. And at any rate, she used to work at that every day, package it, and they had. I remember in the basement we had carton after carton, with the attitude, well, when they need it, we'll find a way to ship it, And they made scarves and they made clothing for babies and whatever else, just to keep busy, and they didn't know what else to do.
Sure. You said, what year do you finish high school?
I should have finished high school in 45, but I graduated a year early, and I was in the ROTC in high school, and because of that, they allowed me to volunteer, which is what I did. Volunteered 2 days after I was 17, into the Army. And they guaranteed that I would be close to home, would camp near home for basic training, and that because I was in the ROTC for 3 years, I guess, and an officer at that time, which is meaningless, but that they would cut my 16-week basic training into 8 weeks, because I already knew how to march and fire a gun and whatever else. And then that's what happened.
So why do you join the ROCT already in high school?
I joined the Army, yeah. My serial number actually shows that it was regular Army serial number.
So you go off to basic training?
8 weeks of basic training rather than 16 weeks, yeah.
Basic training?
at Camp Roberts, California,
And after your basic training
up to Seattle.
to Seattle.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's basically where you start doing radio operating.
Yeah, well, yeah, I worked Alaska Communication Service, which was what it really was that there was a communication line from Seattle to Anchorage down the Aleutians, and as the American forces got closer and closer to Japan, that line kept getting longer and longer as the areas got safer. And because the communication that we put in there was limited to how many miles it would go, we had a station on some island in the Aleutians on the way down, about what a 500 watt transmitter would cover. And what they did is they would pick up coded messages for Washington, for the military government, and they would send it up through the islands to Anchorage, down to 2 Alaskan cities, and then into Seattle, where we decoded it and then recoded it and sent it on to Washington.
And how long do you do this for?
But a year and a half, I guess.
Yeah.
About a year and a half.
Until you get discharged?
Pardon?
Until you get out of the Army?
Yeah, until my discharge. I was held longer for 2 reasons. Number one, my serial number dictated regular Army. And secondly, is that the MOS that I had, the military signal that I had, said that I was an electronic expert. And they didn't want to discharge them too quick.
So what year did you get out of the Army? What year is it? 1946?
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was, yes, late 46 November, I think, because I started to work with this Israeli or Palestinian thing in February of 47.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah,
You get discharged from the Army. You're done with the Army. Finished, right?
yeah.
You go back to LA. Where do you go?
I stayed there for a while,
Seattle.
mainly because I found a position, a way to earn some money with the War Assets Administration in Seattle.
What's that?
Well, right after World War II, U.S. government decided that they overbought so much material that they have to get rid of it. They want to close down some bases. And so what happened is that while I was at the administration, short period of time, a junk dealer from Spokane, who I used to see come through there all the time and buying stuff, approached me and he says, I got a deal that'll make your life worthwhile. And he recruited me to purchase electronic material for the Israel government and organization.
Who was this guy?
Forgot his name.
Is he written down in your notes?
No, he introduced me though
Is
to,
this how the whole thing starts with you?
yeah,
Through this guy?
yeah,
So basically, you're working in Seattle with
With surplus-
a government organization that is trying to figure how to get rid of all this raw material,
Right.
metal, scrap,
oh no,
everything.
oh no, it's shoes and socks and airplanes and PT boats and whatever.
The whole
We bought
thing.
eight PT boats almost immediately.
You could sell them on the black market.
No, at that time, the real advantage was, and that's why they were looking for people like myself, is that the War Assets Administration honored veterans. We could buy stuff open account up to a financial limit. So, and that's really what we
And
did.
you're working for them as a civilian,
Oh yes, yes.
right?
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
your job there?
Where, at War Assets?
Yeah.
Yeah, the job was as a disposal person. I mean, you know, I was like 19,
No,
20.
why did you decide to take this job?
Because it
Make
was
some
close
money?
by, yeah,
Money.
and I could make some money.
Make some money.
Yeah, and
So this guy walks up to you, and he says, "Listen."
yeah. While we're at the one of the sales, because it was all bid sales mainly. That is, they'd put up a whole stack
There's
of
a PT boat.
of Army boat.
PT boat.
Yeah.
And 20 people are saying $100, 15.
No, seal bids. Seal
Okay.
bids, yeah. Yeah. Other stuff, they set prices on, like GI boot or airplanes like this $250,000 airplane you could buy for $5,000 and you're an ex-GI. We'll give it to you open account for 30 days. So you can take it, do with what you want, and as long as you pay us back the money in 30 days, then your credit's good again, you can buy another one.
Sounds like Chicago.
That's what it was, yeah.
So who is this guy that approaches you, and what does he say?
Well, he introduced me to a man whose name you may have heard before. He was, I think he was 6 months older than I was, from New York, Dan Flitterblom. He was the head of the communications procurement for the Israel in organization. And he came out of Yonkers, as I recall. Yeah, out of Yonkers.
He was from Yonkers?
Yeah, they had a big warehouse there, and they had a big,
Who's they?
the volunteers working at that end. What we were doing is taking material, because a lot of what we were buying was used. Like I bought quantities, as much as I could, of walkie-talkies and handy-talkies and field telephones. A lot of it used.
Sure.
And we'd ship it into Yonkers.
To New
and
York?
Yeah, and
Right?
they,
By train?
truck usually,
Truck.
yeah, and it would go into New York and then up to Yonkers, where they had a warehouse with a big shop. They had another large shop in Brooklyn.
At the Navy Yard.
No, right downtown.
Really?
Yeah.
So this is all Haganah, basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Let's call the person her real name.
Yeah,
Haganah.
that's
the
what it
committee
was.
for Israel or committee
Yeah,
for
and
this.
they had personnel all lined up already, you know.
So you're in Seattle. This guy approaches you. What do you say to him?
I said, what's the deal, you know? And he said, it's not going to pay as much as you earn now, which was very little. And he said, but you're going to do good. And you can do good, and it'll be exciting, and it may give you a basis of what to do with the rest of your life.
A lot of words of wisdom.
Yeah, he was really trying to remember his name. I'll remember it, but yeah.
And what was your reaction?
My reaction was, what is it? And then he brought in this young man from Yonkers, which gave me a checking list of what they needed,
Did they explain to you that this is for Palestine, that this is for the army?
Yep.
this?
And we're going to ship it to New York, and we got warehouses in Brooklyn, we got warehouses in Yonkers. We've got a lot of people that are volunteering to do the overall work, put it all in good condition, so that when it's needed, it can be packed and shipped. Yeah.
So you agree?
Yes, I did.
But
Yeah.
but this doesn't mean that you have to quit your job. You don't have to quit your job.
Well, I did, because I had to travel the whole West Coast. I had to travel the whole West Coast. There was 15 or 16 warehouses on the West Coast that were all selling stuff.
But where do you have the money from?
It's open account. My signature, I'm an ex-GI. And
So you're buying it with your own money?
no, I'm buying with my own credit.
With your own credit.
Yeah, and then what I would do would be to call this office in Yonkers and said, I just bought 800 AA telephones and I need
$1,000.
Yeah, I need $2,500, $3,000. And they said, okay, it'll take 2 days, but it'll be there. So then I could take that into the WRS and they take it off my account.
So they used the fact that you were a GI?
They only wanted veterans because they could.
Because you had benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you could get open account
Yeah.
and billing, And when we were buying airplanes, that was really important because now you're talking big money, even though it was only $5,000 or $6,000.
Okay.
But there were times that
You bought airplanes?
I ended up after I bought whatever I could in electronic material that was on their way. What they
talking
really
about
needed,
radios?
they needed field radios, handy little telephone, the portable telephone,
Sure.
and then they needed as much as they could of AA8 telephone wire, big reels of 2-conductor wire to connect these phones together. We shipped, at one point out of Oakland Army Base, I shipped 2 truckloads of that wire back to Yonkers.
Telephone wire.
Yeah, and the reels weighed about 250 pounds each. And we filled.
You didn't do the driving to Yonkers?
Oh, no.
They had,
But I had to find the trucker to do
sure,
it.
you gotta produce it.
Yeah, I only did that one time.
You did the drive one time?
No, I was with the driver one time.
Yeah.
And it's in this history.
We're gonna read.
Yeah, which is, and I can go right to it now. When, and you already know that part of the story, when the Air Force, or the air end of it, moved to the Czech Republic.
To Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
The airlift.
Yeah, when we bought the S-199s, the Me-109, Messerschmitts, and the Spitfires and other things. But we had an airfield there. We had a warehouse space and whatever else.
In Czechoslovakia.
Yes, right. And we had one of the main things, Czech Republic at that time was so poor, looking for whatever they could sell. They sold machine guns, bullets, whatever else. So in Czechoslovakia, they sold Haganah, I've forgotten how many tons of 30 caliber machine gun shells. But it was all loose shells in big barrels. And you can't fire that in an airplane. You need a belt to go. So another fella and myself went up to Stockton military, naval base, and we walked in and looked over in the corner, and here's a whole corner full of empty 30 caliber machine gun belts, just stacked up in the corner. So I said to the guy, what are you going to do with that? He says, nobody's even looked at it. Who would want that kind of a thing? So I said, I think I got a guy. Would you sell it by the ton? And he said, I'll take whatever offer. We tried to put it up on sealed bid. We never got a bid. So I called Yonkers, or at that time I was calling New York, or LA, I was calling at Burbank Aircraft. Because at that time we had already, Al Schwimmer had moved down to Burbank Aircraft, and Teddy Kowalik.
Teddy Kolick.
Kolick.
What about him?
Was here in Burbank. Teddy took care of inventorying and making up lists of what they had and what they needed in the United States to be able to ship at one time. And his desk was right across the office from Schwimmer's desk. And but at any rate,
who's your boss in this whole operation? Who's the guy that you're...
The one I reported closest to was Teddy when he moved into L.A. When he came,
You would call him and you'd say, I got,
yeah, and then he would go to New York.
Well,
Before that, I was going to New York,
well, he
and it
was-
was very confused.
I know, but he was one of the big guys. I mean, they had an office on 14th Street
Yeah,
in New York.
right.
And he ran that whole operation,
Yeah,
basically.
right.
He was basically Haganah's representative here. I think there were a few at his level, but
Yeah.
he was pretty high.
Yeah, oh yeah, but he came down to
L.A.?
L.A. on a regular basis,
Yep.
and he had a ledger with everything
That they needed.
that they already owned, where it was at, how much of it, and what else they needed to supplement it. Now, a lot of what we got, the government didn't sell. They had sold before, or they sold in large enough lots where it was just too much, because they had no sense of merchandising. They said, let's get rid of that pile, you know? But in the case of the, it's an interesting story, in the case of the 30 caliber machine gun belts, they were all empty, all used, and they came off of, I don't know how many, a considerable quantity of large naval crafts that went into to mothballs in the harbor in Stockton, California, and they stripped everything off. So these were all of the belts off of all the machine guns. At any rate, what do you do with them? We bought them, took 2 full semi-loads to bring them down to L.A. because we didn't know where else to take them, because it cost us, I think I paid $800 for the whole thing. It cost over $1,000 for the 2 trucks to bring it down. And another man in LA said, I know what to do with those. He was in the office in Burbank. He said, I know what to do with those. He said, there's an independent canner out in Orange County, and he's Gentile, but his partner's Jewish. And I'm sure that I can work out something with it. So I went out there with him with a whole box full of these belts. And he took the number 10 restaurant size cans, and we saw how many belts we could
Put in.
cover in there. And he had his art department make up a ketchup label to put on the outside of the can, and cartons that said ketchup on the outside, and he packaged all those for nothing. It was a big job. They worked after the plant closed down, he came in, the 2 partners came in with a couple of machine operators, and they did everything. At any rate, loaded it into a semi-truck that should have carried X number of thousands of pounds. This weighed almost double that. But they had to disguise it like ketchup. And it left Orange County, and I rode in the semi-truck with the driver and an assistant driver, knowing that we would only stop for gasoline and maybe food. We went from there out Route 66 when it was still there. Went out Route 66. We had a 4-door passenger car in front of us that we didn't know anything about at all. But every time we came to a wait station, the 4-door passenger car would go through the wait station first, and the lights would go out in the wait station. And then we'd just go on without going over a scale or anybody marking the license plate numbers on the truck. That went into Brooklyn Harbor, and have you ever been in Brooklyn Harbor? Well, see how the
Red Hook.
See how the semis line up to get unloaded there? And if anybody tries to sneak into a line, they could get killed, you know?
But you guys had protection.
The semi-truck drove straight down past maybe 25 semi-trucks, right to the dock, backed up, and they put stevedores on board, and they handled these cartons that weighed double what they were marked, about 60 pounds, I'd say. They were marked 32 pounds or whatever, and they had 3 stevedores picking up these cartons and throwing them up a conveyor belt onto the ship, just like they weighed 30 pounds. And
Now, in that story, there's a lot of anecdotes. The first anecdote that comes to my mind is I interviewed a guy 3 weeks ago in New York named Marvin Sugarman. Marvin Sugarman, he's 81 years old today. He was very young when this happened and blah, blah, blah. But he is an expert on the Jewish mafia's connection to helping Israel become a state and getting weapons and all these things.
yeah.
And one thing that he told me is that the Haganah had a very good agreement with the mob about anything.
Well,
to
the
do with
union
army.
there was mob, yeah.
Yeah, of course. How could you pass 25 trucks?
Yeah, right, yeah.
You can't do
Yeah,
that.
well, we shut
You
down.
would do that if it's organized.
Well, I'm saying we probably passed 20 states, 25 states from LA to Brooklyn, probably 50 wait stations that turned their lights off, didn't even want to see us when we went through.
Explain to me what a wait station is.
Huh?
Explain to me what a wait station
It's
is.
on the road. You're in California, you see a lot more of them. On the road, there's a little turnoff, says all trucks over X number of tons have to pull in here and get weighed to make sure that you're not overweight. So you pull off, you go across the scale, and if your information that you have
Is not correct.
painted on your, that it's
What do they
30,
flag you down? They flag you down and make
no,
you...
no, oh yeah, if you try and bypass that, the highway patrol comes right after you. Yeah.
So they didn't do that.
Well, this wait station was closed when we went through. But I'm sure there's a dozen stories just like that, maybe more. The other one.
Now these 30 millimeter belts, they went to Palestine or to Czechoslovakia? To Palestine.
No, they went to Czechoslovakia first because Haganah had bought a tremendous quantity of German 30 caliber shells.
Hold on. Yes, continue.
They had bought tremendous quantities of 30 caliber shells. So they put
them together.
the shells into
How
it.
big are 30 caliber shells? Like that big?
Yeah. At any rate,
So then you go back to LA and you keep on.
I came back to LA, and I came back to LA with some Haganah owned material that they had, which was aircraft instruments and navigation equipment, which Schwimmer wanted in Burbank.
He was in Burbank, wasn't he?
Yes, that's his office. It was his office, yeah.
And Teddy Kollek would come
Well,
there often?
I can tell you exactly. It was in the.
Tell me. Take your time and read it to me.
Well, very few, and these were the only ones that I was really closely associated with. Al Schwimmer, for one, he was really a genius when it came to aircraft. Teddy Kollek, Willie Sasnow, who was Schwimmer's A&E mechanic. He was the best aircraft mechanic I ever saw, and Hank Greenspun. And Hank and Willie were the two that went to Honolulu and stole the machine guns.
Can you tell me about that?
Oh, you haven't heard that?
And that's your cousin, exactly.
My great uncle.
Your great
Yep,
uncle is also
yep,
involved in that.
Yep. Well, it was his yard. It was his yard, right?
So Willie and Hank,
Yeah, Willie and Hank. Well, Hank had no idea of what an aircraft engine looks like, So her uncle, who I didn't know, still don't know, that called and made an offer to some Jewish tourist that was in Hawaii that knew what was happening in New York and said, I've got those big cases over there with aircraft engines in it that nobody seems to be interested in. So they sent Willie over first, and he examined them, and they were C-46 engines, brand new, never been out of the box. At that time, we had bought 10 C-46s that would ultimately be the Panamanian National Airline, which you've heard part of the story already. But while Willie was there, he called Al, and he said, Al, I need somebody here to do the business end. I know what the aircraft engines are,
Right.
and how much they weigh and whatever, and it's more than we need, but the C-46 is going to last for a long time. So Greenspan went over there, he hung around Al Schwimmer's office in Burbank, at the Burbank airport, and he's a pretty good businessman, a very sharp guy. And we're talking about people that are all 20 years old or less, with the exception of Al's a little older.
And Al's is like 40, no?
No, at that time he was maybe barely 30, I don't remember. But he was a young man at any rate. It was a big dream. And at any rate, we talked to it. So he sent Greenspan over, and Greenspan looks at these 64 cases of aircraft engines, and we have 10 aircraft using 2 each. So it's like a lifetime supply. So he said, Willie, how many can we really use? And Willie said, we could use 20. So while they're trapping around in her uncle's junkyard, the Marine Corps supply depot backs right up to her uncle's yard with a little low wire fence around it. So they look over the wire fence, and here's a warehouse that's got stacks of 30 and 50 caliber machine guns stacked in it. So they're there for most of the day, and they don't see anybody come by to even look at them. And there's no people working in that yard even. So they make a decision to take 20 of the engines out of the cases and load them with machine guns from the military base, which nobody seems to care about. So now they've got a whole bunch of cases that all weigh about the same with all these machine guns, and they ship them into. Greenspan spent almost a week there with the Jewish community trying to raise enough money to pay to have them shipped. And he did. He ended up getting enough money.
No.
But paying this whole thing, there was a tremendous amount of money coming out of Hollywood as donations from the motion picture industry.
From who?
Huh?
From who?
From the motion picture industry.
To support this illegal weapons?
Support the Jewish cause. And
What, like Jack Warner?
yeah, and everybody, really everybody. Matter of fact, there's another interesting thing.
I heard there was also another guy who was helping out a lot in L.A. He was a gangster, though, but his name was Mickey Cohen.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, he was probably the Chicago Mafia.
Chicago Mafia?
Yeah. But at any rate, the bottom line being is that with all these machine guns, and then what they did, they brought them into San Pedro, out to the harbor. They had a shoe store out there, and it had a big basement in it, and they had 10 or 12 recent immigrants from the Holocaust. Didn't even speak English, but they're very good machinists. And they went through and they rebuilt all these machine guns, one at a time, tested them all out without shells in the basement of this shoe store. Then they packed them up 6 or 8 to a gunny sack, old potato sack. And then they would call you and say, can you store 4 gunny sacks in your garage for a while? We'll call you when we need them. And called her, called me. Meanwhile, they ended up with 80 some odd sacks.
All around Los Angeles?
All around the LA area. And that's when the real problem concerned where they tried to smuggle them out of the country. And most of them, and Willie and Al Schwimmer, and there was 5 that were indicted and found guilty, lost their passports, and Kennedy pardoned them about a week before he was killed. And unfortunately, Willie had done so much work in flying. He stole airplanes.
What's Willie's last name?
Sosnow, S-O-S-N-O-W. He was a good personal friend. Stayed at our house a lot. And
Stole airplanes?
well, out of London, yeah. He contrived a deal with 3 de Havillands that he found there that the owner was willing to sell at a very cheap price, but he couldn't get them out of the country. So Willie formed a fictitious motion picture company, and he said, we're going to make a movie, a World War II movie, and we're going to fly these 3 de Havillands out to the water and then take a lot of photographs and turn them around and bring them back again. Well, they flew out over the water and they just kept going and going and going.
I never heard that story.
Yeah.
When was this?
I don't know if I have the date or not.
Can you find that passage where you wrote about that? Because I never heard that story before.
Yep. There was another motion picture producer, Bernie Feynman, who, and I'll tell you, there were 2 East Coast Jews with big money bought an aircraft carrier, surplus aircraft carrier. And they had it in Boston Shipyard, and they fought the government almost to the Supreme Court to get it out. And they never got it out. They sunk it. I know that I have it.
Take your time.
Yeah, they paid $125,000 for that aircraft carrier.
For an aircraft carrier?
Yeah, it was what they used to call a baby aircraft carrier. Took lightweight aircraft on and off. Before
Who bought it?
2 Jewish businessmen out of New York.
Yeah. Okay.
They took the landing deck off of it, cut it up, loaded it down in the bottom of the ship, and said to the State Department, we're not going to use it for military. We're going to take it down to Cuba, and they're going to rebuild it as a cruise ship to take passengers around. Well, they never let them get it out.
Because they knew what they were doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I had that. I'll find it. Yeah, when we were buying the C-47s, the DC-3s, which there's still thousands of them flying, the government was selling them for $15,000. The plane cost, Douglas sold the planes to the government for $250,000. but XGIs could buy them for $750 down.
How is it possible that you're able to buy all this equipment using your credit again,
Well,
again, and again?
Oh, yeah, every time you pay them back,
I understand.
and it got more and more, because I'd buy from them maybe.
How is it possible that the FBI is not like, what's up with this guy? Why is he buying so much? What, like, what?
Yeah,
Why?
yeah,
Did
and
you
yet,
ever ask yourself why?
and
they
yet
never-
the FBI was on the dock across the street from the dock when they were unloading those machine guns, putting them on the sailboat. They took a picture of the whole thing, and I don't know. They never did. A lot of it was like I bought a seat. I'd go to Tucson, where the major graveyard of World War II aircraft was. I'd go there and with Willie, and we pick out a C-47. We were looking for that. We pick out a C-47, hopefully one with a log. Most of them had no log, so you had no idea what condition the engine was in or the airframe or anything. But we go there and find the best one we thought we could find, and I'd sign for it, put down $750 down, 30 days to pay the balance, and then I'd sell it to you. Now, I'm no longer on title. I'd sell it to you, and you 2 days later would sell it to him, and 2 days later he'd sell it to him. And if the FBI wanted to track the ownership, they couldn't find the original owner.
They'd be running after their own tails.
Yeah, yeah. And then we would Willie would try and put it into flyable condition. We would take a ferry permit to fly it from Tucson to Douglas Yard in El Segundo in LA for overhaul, and which is a daytime flight. You can't fly over residential area, and it has to be done in daylight hours. And from Tucson to the beach in LA, to El Segundo, was a minimum 2-day trip, maybe 3. Fly for 3 hours or 4 hours and have to go around. To get into El Segundo, you got to go all the way around out to the Pacific Ocean and come back in again, because you can't fly over. So Willie's theory was, and the pilot who flew out, their theory was that if the propellers turned over and the engine sounded all right, we would exercise the ferry permit. They paint numbers on the bottom of the plane. Exercise the ferry permit and fly directly to Mexico. And we had a overhaul facility which was established in Mexico, and we fly it right in there, and they'd overhaul the plane and whatever, put it in good working order, and then we could, with 2 DC-3s, we could also dismantle 2 Piper Cubs. No, we could do 4 Piper Cubs in 2 DC-3s and put the parts in the 2 C-47s, fly them over, reassemble them, and you got 4 little observation planes that came with it.
So you become quite involved.
Yeah, and a lot of it was the surplus business at that time. The predominant ownership of companies dealing in military surplus were Jewish. And a lot of them were willing to do favors, but they weren't willing to give stuff away, like her uncle. We had a few that did, but what would happen is that I'd get a call from New York, and they'd say, we can use 1,200 more EE8 telephones. And I would tell them, I haven't seen Dwarasset sell any for 6 months. They already dissipate their inventories. So I'd go to the surplus dealers and I'd say, I need EE8 telephones. How many do you have that you can spare? And, well, what do you give us? Well, I'll give you handy talkies on a trade, or I'll give you clothing. We were down by that time buying dungarees and uniforms and boots and whatever. And so I would trade with them. Stuff that Hog and I had laid out money for, that now we could trade for something we need worse. And at one time they sent a inquiry in, we really need women's boots. But the only boots we could find were size 10, 11, 12, whatever. So I'd go around to the surplus dealers that were dealing in clothing, and I'd say, how many boots do you have that are under size 7.5? I'll take them all and I'll give you 2 for 1 in big boots. And that's how we accumulated. That's how we did business.
What would happen if you would be exposed or caught? I mean, you were doing this kind of like...
No, not really doing anything.
You weren't doing anything illegal.
The only part that I was really concerned with, because originally there was another young man out of San Francisco that I worked with. He would spot stuff and I would fly up, and if it was too much, I'd buy half of it with my credit and he'd buy half with his credit, and then he kind of dissipated. I'd lost track of him. So when I was on my own, so to speak, it made it a lot more difficult to go around and work trades and whatever. But the thing that concerned me more than anything else, we had a lot of giving Jews. I'm talking about, they didn't know what else to do, but here's money.
Why did that concern
cash
you?
Money.
Why did that concern you?
Because I would come back with a shopping bag. I would get a call from one of the motion picture people and said, we had a meeting the other night and everybody agreed after the poker game, whatever they won, they donate. So I'd say, what do I do? Well, here's my address. You can pick up a bundle here. So I'd go there and there'd be a shopping bag full of currency, you know. Now I got to take it back to Burbank Airport, which is the closest office I have. And we would count it and we'd bundle it and whatever. And then Greenspun, or one of the other guys, would, Kolick mainly, would come in like once every 3 weeks or whatever, and he'd have a briefcase that he'd take back with him. That was all bundled currency that we got from the motion picture. But I'm talking about tens of thousands of dollars. Tens of thousands of dollars. And it was all cash. And that was the only time when I really kept looking over my shoulder, you know, buying surplus, trading surplus, buying aircraft, trading, exchanging ownership. Sometimes we had 10 or 12 owners specifically of a fighter aircraft. We wanted to lose its identity totally. And
you're learning the ropes as you go along. You're learning.
I'm making my own rules is what I'm doing. And the only rule that I had is that if you need money, call Yonkers, you know, and tell them how much you need and where you want it at. And because I didn't have a bank account at that time. But that's what...
Did you understand at the time what you were doing?
I knew what the purpose of it all was. Yes, that's correct, yeah. I wanted to find that one thing. We also had a funny thing, and that was Schwimmer that came up with it, I think. I had never dealt in munitions before, and our government had excess munitions. War Assets Administration in Sacramento Army Depot had 200 tons of M3 demolition blocks, TNT.
How many tons?
200 tons. They weighed 2.25 pounds each for a dime a piece. So I went in there when I heard about it, because it was a fixed price. I went in there with a truck and I extended my whole credit line on it, on filling the truck up. And then I think I got a second truck out of there, and then all of a sudden they decided that one of the ordnance bases may need the 75 ton that I left behind, because I only took like 20 ton or 20. So they withdrew them. But we got those, and we found an oil company that gave us 55-gallon drums, and we loaded those blocks into the drums and tried to ship it out of the country as fertilizer, and it didn't work. And then we tried again and again, and then after they pulled the embargo, we were able to ship them, and they got to Israel, but after 48.
How long were you doing this for? You said that you started in February
47. 47, February 47. Actually, like December 46, but 47 really, when I think the first couple of buys I made were around then. And then I worked till May 48, which was the mandate, right?
No, independence.
Yeah, well, independent. Yeah, independence,
May 48.
yeah, May 48.
Yeah.
I must have worked about maybe 2 months after that, trying to clean up everything, mainly at Burbank Airport, because Al Schwimmer had lost his passport, and we had to get him out of the country, because he was the one that started Israeli aircraft industry in Israel. But we had to get him out of the country without a passport.
Wait a minute. Al Schwimmer was arrested?
Arrested and found guilty with 5 others. Schwimmer was convicted in 1950 for violating U.S. Neutrality Act for smuggling airplanes to Israel. Fined $10,000 and stripped of his civil rights.
But you guys snuck him out of the country.
We got him out, yeah.
So he was tried and absent.
No, he was already tried and found guilty. He didn't serve time, but he lost his passport. Not supposed to go out of the country. And I guess whoever, one of the presidents pardoned him long afterwards, yeah.
So, but you were talking about smuggling him out of the country.
Well, he wasn't really, we got him out of the country without a passport.
How? Who?
I think Teddy was probably the one that was responsible for that. It was on I remember Al always wanted to buy a Constellation, and he bought 3 of them. One of them, they crashed getting into Czech Republic. But the other 2 were the first 2 planes that LL ever flew. And at that time, Al was already there. So he probably went out on one of the planes that went down to Central America, flew across to Africa, then up to Czech Republic.
Now, the whole time that you're working, you're not working, you're volunteering. I mean,
No, I was getting paid.
You were getting paid.
Oh yeah, yeah, almost nothing, but I was getting paid. I was getting $50 a week. And plus the main expense that they would pay for was I didn't have a car, so if I needed a car to go to
San Francisco.
wherever, then they would pay for the car while I was there. And I forgot what the per diem per day, it was very low. I could barely rent a room, much less buy 3 meals, you know. But a lot of it was, I would go in to see a surplus dealer, and he'd say, come on, let's go out and have lunch, you know.
And you could eat by your lunch.
Yeah, right.
Hold on, I want to switch a battery for a second. Hold on. What is that document that you're looking at right now? What is that?
This is, at one time, we had at the congregation here, at the synagogue here, we had a number of elderly that were really had been in Europe and even been in camps and had lost their family, whatever, moved here. And every once in a while, one of them would do a speech, and we had like an adult. And I did this at that time, how I put this together.
She's just taking some pictures.
Okay. See, yeah, Kennedy issued the pardon in 1961 for Willie Sosnow, and I think he did for all 5 of the guys that were indicted and found guilty, including Al Schwimmer. But Al was out of Burbank well before 1961.
Where was he?
He was in Tel Aviv someplace. He was already building.
So he was tried and absent.
No. He was they tried him on the machine gun count, smuggling the machine guns, but they tried Al also on being responsible smuggling embargoed aircraft out. And he and Winters, a Gentile by the name of Winters in Florida, I'm sure you heard of him, that he was also found guilty, and he was the only person I know of in this whole rigmarole that served time.
And he wasn't even Jewish?
No, he was Gentile.
What was his name?
Winters. And I'm sure I have the record of it here. But they had 3 B-17s. He owned one, and he was a pilot. And one came out of Connecticut, and one came out of Burbank. The one out of Burbank made it all the way to Czech Republic. The one out of Connecticut, they embargoed in Italy when they had to make an emergency landing. And the one that Winters was flying, they let him get in the air, and then they arrested him. They brought him back in again and arrested him, and he served time, found guilty and served time.
What can you tell me about Teddy Kollek?
Not very much. I met him and worked with him 6 times. There were things that took more than one person, and just the schlepping alone. I was never, we were never paid to do loading and unloading. We did it ourselves, you know. And Teddy was kind of a starker. He was pretty good. And he went out with it. I went out with him a couple of times, mainly out to Tucson, where he and I and Willie Sosnow would go through a lot of these mothballed planes with a list of instruments that we needed. One of the problems were when we bought Hug and I bought the ME-109s in the Czech Republic.
What are those?
That's the Messerschmitt.
Okay, yeah.
They all had German instruments in them. And they had to teach people, Americans and Canadians and South Africans, to fly those planes. And they couldn't read the instruments. So what we were doing, we were going down through Tucson mainly, where all these planes were parked out. And a lot of them had been bought already by Jewish and even non-Jewish scrap dealers that were really after the aluminum and copper and whatever. The instruments and stuff they had taken out. But the front panels, most of them were still in. And Willie was aware of, we need that instrument and that instrument. And we'd go in and we'd take those out. And
What kind of person was he?
Willie?
No, Teddy.
Oh, Teddy, I don't know. He was kind of an outgoing guy. He was an outgoing, very easy guy to talk to. And I probably only had 3 or 4 times when I spent more than just conversation in the office, in Schwimmer's office in Burbank. There's 3 or 4 times we went down to Arizona to try and find enough instruments to ship into Prague or into Czech Republic. And but he was affable, and he, you know, and a lot of the people we had that worked in, I worked out on the coast. There was 11 or 12 20-year-olds, 19 and 20-year-olds like me that worked in other areas in the country. Very infrequently did I go to a war assets sale out of California, Nevada, or Arizona.
And there were guys on the West Coast and
Yeah,
everywhere.
down in Texas and whatever, yeah. And
So you were one of many.
about, I think total about 11. And yeah. And that, and we all pretty much did the same thing. A lot of them though, like I had a specialty when I started out with electronics. Another one had a specialty of armament material. Another one was hydraulics and whatever. So everybody was a little different.
Everybody had his own.
Yeah, and you bought within your field, but all of the fields changed as the demand changed. As I said, we got down to women's boots, we got down to raincoats.
Is there any specific crisis that you can remember? Some incident that happened that, as we say in English, like the shit almost hit the fan or something like that? Or can you remember something?
Where the machine guns that came out of the yard in Florida, in Hawaii, when they were being smuggled onto the sailboat in San Pedro in Los Angeles Harbor, they sent around 2.5-ton trucks, small trucks, to pick up these gunny sacks with 5 to 8 machine guns in each one at people's homes mainly, or people's place of business. One sack here, one sack there, Hollywood, all over. And when they brought these, I think there were 3 of these 2.5-ton rental trucks, when they brought them down onto the wharf to put the machine guns onto this sailboat, one of them rolled out and fell onto the dock, and the canvas, the burlap, ripped open, and the machine guns rolled down the dock. I was sitting at the trial when Willie and the rest of them were tried. And the FBI had a picture, a motion picture of this machine guns rolling down the dock. So they had been following these for a long time.
Did you ever personally have problems with the FBI? No.
No, as a matter of fact, because of my working on this, I went into an allied business myself. I went into the surplus business after I got done. Because I was through with them in August
48?
48. 48.
48.
In September 48, I was about done. I had cleared up everything.
You didn't think about going to Palestine to fight in the war?
No. I got married in November.
Okay.
Yeah, it was Thanksgiving. And this year I'll be married 70 years. She's upstairs. Yeah, my wife has dementia. She lives here. At any rate, yeah, we've known Susan for ever since we were here 2 years before they moved here.
25.
Yeah, well, in 4 years, 29 years we've been here.
Herb, this interview was fascinating because the way that you helped and what you did is it's remarkable.
Well, it was the opportunity, it was the ideal opportunity. The only thing that was really adverse about the whole thing was the embargo that the State Department put on any, what they called war-type material. And then it became any material being shipped to Palestine.
Oh,
And
sure.
at that time, the other Palestinian states, Jordan, Egypt got a whole fleet of Spitfire aircraft from England
Yeah.
with no cost at all.
Yeah.
And Jordan got Spitfires.
Jordan was completely supplied by the British.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Right. And also, the Arabs had purchased $37 million worth of U.S. arms through the Office of Foreign Liquidations, which is a parallel of the War Assets Administration. So they bought tanks that were left in Africa.
Yeah. No, that's clear. And also, I was just telling, what was the name of the lady that we interviewed? Doris. That, she was like, Truman recognized Israel. And I said, yeah, he was the first one to recognize Israel. But he recognized Israel and he imposed an embargo. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
So, I think that was a very political,
Yeah.
thing. And I see you have this huge booklet here. Can you explain to me what this is?
Well, for about the last 15 or almost 20 years, I guess, I have searched the web newspapers and correspondence from people, and I have accumulated all of the information I could find on Machal, including even the ships that were bought to take the immigrants out of
Sure.
out of
Europe, out of
Belgium,
Marseille.
and out of Paris.
Sure.
Yeah, and so this gives.
If you've done such intensive research about Machal, there is something that I'd like to ask you that maybe you can tell me about. There was a guy who volunteered for Machal named Jesse Slade. He was a Navajo Indian who had absolutely nothing, no connection to Judaism, but he served in the Second World War, and his two officers, who were Jewish, treated him very well. And he said to them, I get spat on by, I'm treated like dirt because, and these two guys went and volunteered in Machal, and he followed them, and he was he was this Navajo Indian,
I think I heard of
Cherokee or a Navajo,
Yeah.
and he stayed in Israel after the war and was killed like 2 years after the war when he tried to cross into Petra by the Jordanians. And I'm wondering if, I found a picture of him, and I interviewed a guy in Toronto who knew him, and I was wondering if maybe you have any information in
No,
this huge
I,
book of
I
yours.
don't recall. It seems I recall that kind of a story,
Yes.
because this was Christian volunteers honoring for defending Israel in 1948.
Yeah.
But there's a whole listing of Christian or non-Jewish volunteers.
Oh, no, that of course there were, but this guy was a Navajo. He was an American, a Native American, and Jesse Slade. So how do I get a copy of that?
Of what? Well,
Wow, that's very impressive.
yeah, this is, I was told, showing this to a couple of the men that live here. That's the German Messerschmitt with the Star of David on it. That's same. They couldn't believe it. I'm sure if I go through here, I probably read about it. Sounds
Yeah,
familiar.
sounds
Yeah,
familiar.
yeah. Yep. Because there is a list of up until maybe 2 years ago, or 3 at the most, of all of the Machal volunteers that were killed in service.
Sure.
And it's surprising that it's not a longer list than it is. But the funny thing is they had a category of men that they used in the Air Force called chuckers. Did you ever hear that before?
Sure.
And there was a half a dozen of them that were killed during the war. They were just out of the camps, out of the Europe, didn't even speak English. They'd tie them with a rope and tie them against the fuselage, and the bombs were just in wooden crates, and they'd open up the back door of the C-46, and they'd stand out in the open air, and they'd throw the bombs, chuck the bombs out over.
Yes. I know a few people I've interviewed. Herb, I want to film that speech of yours. I'm going to take pictures of it. Is that okay?
Yeah. I can make your
No, I want to get it on here.
Oh.
I just want to thank you.
Okay, fine. No big deal. It's worthwhile. I was trying to remember the names of the other 2 or 3 of the movies that had to do with the same time. One was very early on.